namaste, namaskar, namaskaram, vanakkam to all the attendees. I want to thank you for taking the time this morning. As Kalyanji just mentioned, this is the week 2, day 4 of our panel. Today is a very interesting panel, Hinduism, Hindu Dvesha and Islam. So we're going to examine what is Islam's record in India and how have the scholars, dealt with the Islamic record in India honestly, and what is the impact of Islam on our Hindu culture and psyche. As you know, the impact of Islam has been at least a millennium on Indians, Hindus. We have seen its effect over the almost 1,000 years. And as we are speaking, we are seeing to this day its impact on different parts of India, from the north to the east, to the southwest, down to Kerala, to Bengal, to Kashmir. So today in our panel, as Kalyanji mentioned, we were going to have, we invited Sri Sushil Pandit and also Dr. Rajat Mishra. And as Kalyanji mentioned, Dr. Mishra is not able to join us because he is not well. We apologize for that, but Sri Sushil ji will be very happy to inform and educate us. I want to introduce Sri Sushil Pandit. He is a well-renowned activist, and he's the owner of a private Hive Communications Limited. Sri Sushil Pandit is a scholar, a historian, and a person who speaks his mind. He's a well-known Kashmir activist and a scholar of the Kashmir conflict, which, as you all know, is at least 75 years old, if not older. He's one of the most sought-after political panelists to talk on the subject, and he's also a very well-informed, well-known scholar of this subject of Islam, effect of Islam. He's the co-founder of a nonprofit called Roots in Kashmir. It's an initiative to raise public awareness on reclaiming roots that identify Kashmir Pandits. Most of the audience, I'm sure, has known the changes in Kashmir since 2019, August 2019. I'm sure Sri Sushil Pandit will educate and inform us on all these topics. Welcome, Sri Sushil Pandit ji. Namaste. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Namaste, all of you. I'm grateful for this opportunity. It's a privilege and an honor, and thank you for such a generous introduction, Padmaji. Islam in India has been often referred to as another parallel strain of culture that has enriched us civilizationally. At least that has been the narrative I grew up hearing and understanding from. And one phrase that epitomized this view was Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb, as if it was some kind of an amalgam or syncretic culture. Both, as I grew up and read outside the syllabus, outside the curriculum from independent authors and historians, I realized what a fraud I was committed on successive generations of Indians, even after independence. It is often said that Islam has had a reign of about 1,000 years, a millennia strong. We err about 300 years in that. The first Islamic invader landed in India in 711. Unless we already discount what is Pakistan today as historically Indian territory. Because this invader landed in Sindh. His name was Muhammad bin Qasim, and he was barely out of his teens. an Arab invader who pursued the family of Muhammad, who had taken refuge because they were trying to run away from the internecine, intertribal battle for supremacy and power in Arabia. And the local king, Raja Dahir, after several invasions on him, lost in one of the invasions because Indian morality of war did not permit fighting after the sunset, did not permit fighting, the soldiers resting in the cantonments, did not permit the fighting or killing an unarmed non-combatant. All of it was negated in that war. His family was brutalized. His daughters were sent as a bounty to the caliph in Damascus. And the entire region suffered. Delhi fell in 1192. If we consider Delhi as the nerve center of Indian civilization, which it rightly was, Delhi and the surroundings were where Indraprastha and Hastinapur existed from the Mahabharata times. This was the slave dynasty. But even before that, before 1192, when Delhi fell and the last ruler was Prithviraj Chauhan, we are told about successive invasions by Mahmud of Ghazni from Afghanistan. Indian civilizational boundaries existed beyond Afghanistan. There were, of course, Hindu Shahi rulers in Afghanistan. I've also read somewhere that the word Afghanistan is the distortion of a Sanskrit word Upagana Sthan. Upagana are not the ganas, but the upaganas, you could say subaltern and people living on the borders, on the outer regions. And Sthan, in any case, is a Sanskrit word denoting a geography, a location. Mahmud of Ghazni is considered to be one of the most brutal invaders who started invading India in 10,001 at the very beginning of the millennium, and is supposed to have conducted dozens of raids on India. Almost every winter he would come as if on a vacation, rolling down the plains in any direction. He's supposed to have sacked Somnath many times. It has been the story of utter brutality and humiliation, as told by the Western and Marxist historians. On his return, he would take his bounty, his booty, on hundreds of elephants, and also take thousands as prisoners, slaves, women, to be sold in the slave markets of Central Asia. Of course, a lot of artisans, a lot of great builders, to build his own cities and capitals, as did the raiders from Samarkand, from Bukhara, from Ghazni, from Ghor. India was literally the vault they came to loot, to sack, and to steal from. According to Marxist historians, we've only lost in these invasions time and again, whether it was Ghazni, Mahmud of Ghazni, whether it was Muhammad of Ghori, or later Abdali. They hide our conquests and our successful and heroic defense over the centuries. For example, Muhammad bin Qasim landing in 711 in Sindh, and then the next successful establishment of the Islamic rule in Delhi is 1192. That makes it about 480 years, nearly 5 centuries. How did it take that long when Persia did not even take 50 years, or Egypt? Both in their own right, standalone great civilizations. Egyptian civilization, Egypt did not take more than 35 years. Iran, not even 50 years. And it took almost 500 years for these barbarians to reach the heart. Is in itself a story, a saga of great resistance. Resistance against a very brutal and uncivilized force. We must factor in these issues because as a civilization, we were far, far more evolved in our worldview, in our value system, in our conduct of even war. And what we were faced with was certainly not a civilization. So those who call it a clash of civilizations must correct themselves. Where was the civilization in this clash? There was only one civilization. In any case, in the history, we do not hear of Arab civilization. We have heard of Persian civilization, we've heard of Egyptian civilization, we've heard of Babylonian or Sumerian civilization, we've heard of Greek and Chinese civilization. I have not heard of Arab civilization. These were wilderness in desert. These were tribes who hadn't seen any evolution in terms of literature, music, art, or a knowledge tradition. Hardly none. And therefore, this was a huge contrast. The only profession they knew was war and violence. And that's what, even in their accounts of history or what inspires them as faith, is centered around violence and battles and riches earned through that, which was not the case with us. Even then, the gaps within this history are phenomenal and very interesting. I just mentioned the gap between the first Sindh conquest and the conquest of Delhi, 480 years. The gap between Mahmud Ghazni, who died in 1030, and the conquest of Delhi in 1192 is more than 160 years. If Mahmud was so successful, why weren't his successors coming to India for 160 years till Muhammad Ghori came? Our historians don't write much about it, but the fact is they did come. His nephew, Salar Masood, came in 1033, and his entire army of more than 30,000 was chopped up and buried near Bahraich by the local king Suhail Dev. Not many in this country have heard of him. Our history textbooks have simply obliterated him. And if they don't obliterate, they certainly embroider a lot about these rulers and barbarians. For example, the favorite alibi or apology that the Marxist historians give is that the sacking of temples was essentially because these kings were after gold and riches, and temples is where we accumulated it and kept it. So we were actually, as if almost suggesting that we had it coming, we were asking for it, begging for it. But they keep quiet when you ask, why did Bakhtiyar Khilji go to Nalanda, which had nothing but a huge library and a few monks and students, because it was a university? Why did he behead all those monks and students and teachers and create a pyramid of human skulls? Why did he burn down that library which smoldered for several months? The sheer number of manuscripts there. The fact that they were out to destroy a civilization is more than borne out in each invasion and in each act of barbarian violence. Sacking of temples was routine in order to humiliate, in order to subjugate in a manner that the natives don't even summon the courage of faith to rise again. This is true of Kashmir. This is true of Delhi, where I live now. I mentioned that Delhi was in the very core of our civilization since the days of Mahabharata, as Indraprastha and Hastinapur. Imagine this more than 5,000-6,000 year old history, and in the 100-kilometer radius of Delhi, present day Delhi, we don't have even one, as an exception, even one 100-year-old temple to show for this civilizational continuity. Not even one. Not in 200-kilometer radius. Forget 100. Not even as an exception to show for. I can show you an 800-year-old mosque, which was built by Muhammad Ghori when he sacked Delhi, and with Delhi, it's more than 24 temples near Qutub Minar, and built that mosque from the debris of those temples. The walls of the mosque, the pillars of the mosque bear testimony to that, because the debris have the motifs of the Jains and Hindu temple architecture, the lotuses, the elephant heads, the peacock patterns. I can show you that mosque is 800 years old, more than 800 years old. I don't have even a 100-year-old temple. In these 800 years, not only were the temples destroyed and sacked, nobody was, forget building new temples. Old destroyed temples could not be restored. Such was the tyranny we lived through. The first temple Delhi built in the last 800 years started in 1934 and the construction finished in 1939. This temple is called Lakshmi Narayan Temple, popularly known as Birla Mandir on Mandir Marg. First temple built in 800 years is what we've been through. In this region, in the very heart of India. So it's right now, I don't wish to pull out a laundry list of how temples were destroyed, where they were destroyed, whether it was Kashi, whether it was Mathura, whether it was Delhi, whether it was the sun temples all over, including Multan, and how the temples were destroyed in Kashmir, the most magnificent of them, Martanda, that still stands in its ruins. It is so grand and so breathtakingly beautiful that if you shut your eyes and imagine how it must have been when it stood intact, it is simply a thrilling thought. Or for that matter, if you go to Suraj Kund, and from the base of the Kund, you see the steps rising up to the base of the temple, and you see all the large stone pillars and slabs striven around like graves. And from that base, if you just apply it in your imagination, the logical geometrical proportions as to if base is so wide and big, how huge must have temple risen. You can see through the eye of your mind what an amazing temple that must have been. The ASI plaque that reads there, it's installed there. It says Raja Anangpal used to take the water from the Kund and take those steps right up to the temple and do the Abhishek. And then it says that some of the Islamic rulers came and restored the water tank and beautified its steps. They don't tell you what happened to that temple. Like they don't tell us what happened to Martanda, though we know from the records of Raj Tarangini that Sikandar Butshikan is the French word for iconoclast, tried to burn it down when he couldn't break it. He dug up the trenches around it, packed them up with acres of forest he had chopped, and then lit the fire that burnt for several months. It cracked some of those huge boulders which were used to build the temple, but it still wouldn't fall, so he gave up in frustration. Our temples have been desecrated, our faith ravaged, our people brutalized. And in the words of V.S. Naipaul, our civilization grievously wounded. That is how they left us. They never left us. Correction. That is what they did to us. In the words of Will Durant, an American historian, Islamic conquest of India is the bloodiest story in human history. Not my words. Will Durant says so. Conrad Else says that the Hindu victims of Islam far, far outnumber the Jewish victims of Holocaust by the Nazis. This is an ongoing, relentless, brutal genocide that we've faced in more than 1,300 years. 1,310 years to be precise, if we start counting from 711 when Muhammad bin Qasim started. But as I said, there have been stories of heroic resistance. Nobody tells us in any textbook that Mahmud Ghazni, who would plunder and brutalize India repeatedly, invaded Kashmir twice, and the king of Kashmir, Sangram Raj, gave him a bloody nose both times. The second time, he didn't even have an exit route for running away. He was looking for an escape in the forests of Kashmir and in the mountains of Kashmir for more than 3 months. And this is not the only 2 times he defeated him. The first time he defeated him was when he went to help Trilochan Pal, the ruler of Punjab, who ruled from Lahore till Kabul, joined armies with him and chased Mahmud Ghazni till Ghazni itself. The Mamluks, the Khiljis, the Tughlaqs, and the Mughals were only different in names. Their antipathy towards India, towards Hindu, towards our faith, our civilization, our culture was exactly the same. And if you go down south, very often people say that North bore the brunt of it and South was spared. Then you must go and visit Hampi. It may not have been as relentless, but in brutality, I don't think South was spared either. Look at what Tipu Sultan did. Look at what the kings, Adil Shahi kings, did. Look at what Nizam did before Government of India under Patel committed the police action to bring him to senses. So we've had a tough time in the last 1,310 years. The tragic part is that we are reluctant to tell our story ourselves. Will Durant says this, Konrad Elst says this, David Frawley says this, but Romila Thapas and Bipin Chandras of the world whitewash it. That is our tragedy. The Indian state whitewashes it. Successive governments have whitewashed it. Our historiography leaves much to be desired. Even in the independent India, successive elected governments have found good political, ideological, practical reasons to feed lies to successive generation of Indian students. And it's not just confined to distorting history. It's not just confined to concocting history. It also includes victimizing students and victimizing teachers who dare to step out of line. So departments of history and political science and sociology in successive universities have their own history of torment, have their own history of ruined careers, of their own history of victimizing students.
So, Sushilji, can I interrupt here, if you don't mind, for just 1 minute, okay? See, I want to look at the question, of what are the drivers? In other words, what are the root causes for relentless falsification of history, which is continuing even today by, say, for example, Audrey Truschke. She wants to rewrite the story of Aurangzeb and so on. What in your mind are the drivers for this?
Okay. It is a fact that those who control their history have a control on their future as well. If you cede control on history to the natives, then you make their path easier. It is, I think, part of the colonial design. Colonization has become a lot more sophisticated now. It doesn't seek to control territory or political power, but it certainly does wish to control narrative, control academia, control business and trade, control economy, control monetary policy, control currency, control trade. So the focus has shifted. Control technology, science and technology. So today, they are not willing to let go of these controls. And they happily distort and they happily try and mentally keep you down, psychologically keep you down to a subservient level. Broadly, I feel that seems to be the motivation. If an entire people think of their history, of their ancestry, of their civilization, of their culture, of themselves as an identity with pride, with confidence, a lot is achieved there itself. Confident societies, proud societies deal differently with their challenges as compared to those who are enslaved in their minds and are apologetic about themselves. So the attempt to keep us down and to keep reminding us of our humiliation and also of the fact that what we consider our identity is not the identity that is borne out by history, are very potent tools. For example, Aryan invasion theory. How Britishers tried to keep us down was by telling us that even we were outsiders. So why were we resenting outsiders who came a little later? And therefore, this entire logic of natives versus aliens was flawed. So this is how you manufacture narrative, you manufacture history, you manufacture worldview, and you deprive people, an entire civilization, an entire land of its true, genuine identity. Everything starts from there. And if you start believing in your identity, if you start believing in your tradition, then you will figure that there were knowledge traditions so rich that the rest of the world looked like comprising of cavemen when you had reached a pinnacle in those spheres of knowledge, be it timekeeping, be it mathematics, be it human anatomy, be it medicine, be it grammar, be it aesthetics, be it art, be it music, be it architecture. If you go look up your knowledge traditions that date back thousands of years, you would wonder as to why we are in the state we are in today. And why not strive for achieving that glory all over again that our ancestors were capable of? But if colonialists want you to stick to being coolies, taking headloads about a few decades back and doing codes now, they would have achieved what they wanted to. And not let you do superior work, more quality work, more original work.
So, Sushilji, if I may interrupt with a question, I think you very well described the motivation that prevails in the minds of historians when it comes to history of India. But then you look at the West. The West has suffered at the hands of Islamic terrorism, as late as 2001, and it continues on. And yet, when you look at the reportage, and of course, we have all kinds of destruction of Hindu property and life going on in Bangladesh and some of these other Muslim regions. And yet, when you look at how the media covers these stories, or actually does not cover these stories, you wonder what is their motivation? What is stopping them from calling them out?
Well, I think it's a matter of deep inquiry as to why even the West is in denial, or is it in denial? From the power echelons, from the political class within West, there seems to be a very calibrated and nuanced response to this. Perhaps they don't see any merit in open and candid admission of what they see. Perhaps there is some tactical merit in it, or because most of the Western societies are democracies, and liberal democracies at that, there is a certain hypocrisy built in, a certain political correctness built in, which goes around for the word hypocrisy. Perhaps it will take them some time to be as candid as some of their exceptional leaders like Trump have been. But I often see this even say 70, 80 years back, when Churchill called out the barbarian streak from the Middle East in no uncertain terms. Or look at the present Prime Minister in Great Britain. So time and again, you see very often some very frank and candid observations and responses. What Macron is doing right now in France is an eye-opener. And I don't think he could get more candid than that. The laws they have passed, for the measures that they have taken. I mean, he holds a mirror to the rest of the world, especially to us Indians who've been at the receiving end for far too long and are unwilling to even acknowledge what we've been suffering from. But his responses are so heartening. So I think West is also gradually coming to terms with it and is coming out of this reluctance or this dilemma as to how to describe what vocabulary to use and how much candor to deploy and how much honesty to use in terms of describing what they see. But scholars and academicians have begun to admit it. V.S. Naipaul received his Nobel for literature for a body of work which is so candid. And that's where you see, if Nobel is a standard that Western civilization has created to acknowledge the excellence, then Nobel for V.S. Naipaul shows that they have, and that happened more than a couple of decades back. That shows that they are willing to accept that vocabulary, that terminology, that worldview, which talks about wounded civilization, which talks about an area of darkness, which talks about among the believers, and which talks about what Islamic conquests have done to civilizations across the world.
So, Sushilji, just one point here. A historian like Romula Thapar, okay, what is the incentive structure? I mean, I perhaps we can say she's part of a network that wants to control the narrative, but she has a very personal incentive structure for falsifying history deliberately, doubting, causing confusion amongst the people, and maybe there is also if you look at it in terms of the reward and punishment, two sides of it, right? So there is a way these historians are rewarded for falsifying history, and there is a way they might be punished, or at least the threat of punishment is there for writing the true history, right? And the threat is so real in current day times, right? If you speak the truth, there may be a consequence, a direct and dramatic consequence, which is terrifying, and it is in fact the terror that kind of puts a blanket on any effort towards writing an appropriate, honest, authentic history. I mean, any comments on this dimension of this? And this includes the way the West responds to Islam too.
Mr. Vishwanathan, my view is that history writing in independent India, the first 5, 6, 7 decades, was hostage to ideology. Post the Soviet Revolution, there was an ideological sway across Asia, even in Europe, the world over. It perhaps caught the imagination of our brightest of minds. And this ideological predisposition forced people, or perhaps they were willingly inclined to doctor history according to the ideological objectives. History writing was not an end in itself. It was means to an end, like politics itself, like so many other pursuits in life. So the touchstone for such historians was the objectives that you want to achieve through writing history. And when you are part of a power elite, the rewards follow. You might want to ask why the Punjabis who were evicted from West Punjab in the bloodiest partition you could imagine turned out to be such implacable secularists in independent India with their kind of politics and their kind of academia. What prevented them from seeing or understanding what they saw and felt and suffered from, or saw the suffering across the board? There is a lot of very thick, big ideological blinkers that you prefer to truth. So Bipin Chandra, who himself was a Punjabi, Romila Thapar, who was a Punjabi, had these very clear motivations. I'm discounting Irfan Habib of Aligarh Muslim University, who had a reason. I am discounting successive education ministers in India, right from Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad to Nurul Hasan to Humayun Kabir to MC Chagla, who had a reason. I'm discounting what Sayyid Ahmad had a reason for establishing Aligarh Muslim University. They all had political motives, ideological motives. They worked to a design, to a set of objectives. They didn't see the truth or the reality for what it was. They saw it for what it could be deployed for.
Sushilji, could we take some questions from the Q&A? So we have a question here. Is there any similarity between what was started, in India 1,000 years ago, and what's happening in America after, 2011, the 9/11?
I think 9/11 was a bit of an aberration. Perhaps it was a premature strike, and they did not expect what happened as a result. And for 20 years, America rained its wrath on the perpetrators of 9/11. I must share this very interesting anecdote with you. These days, I don't go to the TV studios, so they send their camera crew for some of the live interactions on television. And one of the cameramen, who after hearing what I had to say during the program, sat down, offered him a cup of tea, and he said, I grew up in Dehradun, and my father couldn't afford, so I went to a government school which shared its boundary wall with a madrasa. So a lot of madrasa students were my friends, and they would come to government school also. And he said, I had a few Muslim friends, and one of the Muslim friends was very close to me, and he would come home and I would share the savories with him, and to the extent that he would even accompany me to the temple during big festivals, and he would happily eat the prasad, because it used to be sweet and nice. So for children, anything nice, delicious from anywhere is welcome. But when his Maulvi at madrasa came to know that he had been to the temple, and he asked him, who took you there and what, and did you like it? And he said, yes, of course I did. And he told him that all this was kufr. And he explained what was kufr and what was iman. And he told him how bad it was, how haram it was in Islam. So this Muslim friend went to his Hindu friend, this cameraman who was talking to me, and he said, this is what my Maulvi tells me. And he says, all these are false gods, and at the first given opportunity, we must smash them. Because unless this kufr is eliminated, Islam will not prevail in the world, and we will never be able to ascend to Jannat. So this young boy in his innocence asked the Maulvi, should I go and smash those idols in the temple that I visited? So Maulvi, you know what Maulvi says? He says, hang on, not so fast. Right now, we are in a minority. And if you do any such thing, There will be an overwhelming reaction. So wait till we are large enough in numbers, and then go and smash those idols. This is what a Maulvi in the madrasa feeds a young mind, young student in his teens, early teens.
Thank you.
So when you talk of 9/11, I feel probably they acted a little in haste, didn't realize that what an overwhelming response there will be. And probably it had to happen, probably Allah had predetermined so. There is a growing realization across the world as to what kind of worldview, what kind of value system, what kind of perception is being fed to billions, hundreds of millions about the others and what it might lead to. They already have begun to do wherever they are in large numbers. The news coming from Bangladesh, the news coming from Afghanistan, the news coming from Pakistan never ends about what is happening to the minorities there, who can never pose a threat in their small numbers. They can never be any kind of threat. Security threat, existential threat, economic threat, socio-cultural threat, none of it. But yet, you will not let them be, because there is an inherent tolerance even to their presence, their existence, in whatever small number. So what might happen as a result, 9/11 is a watershed in our history, in our modern history. And it is going to shape perceptions, it is going to shape responses, it is going to keep people alert and aware of what they face in the times to come. And I'm sure, I can't say I'm happy it happened, but I'm sure we would have gained from it collectively as a world.
We have another question here that's talking about the current situation here in North America. What the leftist scholars were painting with a black brush. Same thing about the activists in North America. We're all being, when we try to raise the awareness about the situation, we are getting this, Hindu activism is being maligned here in the US. What is the best way to counter these sort of attacks here? Everybody has heard about this dismantling conference recently. So Hindu activism is being nipped in the bud, actually, I would say. What is a good way to counter these attacks in North America so we can set the correct narrative here?
You see, this is the vindication of where we stand and the fact that we are succeeding. Something is working. This is the vindication of that. This is the evidence of that. There was a time when they wouldn't even pay attention. They'll just ignore. The books by the academicians will not be even reviewed or referred to. The best way of killing something is by not even taking cognizance of its existence. But the fact today that they are moving men and material to respond to what Hindutva or right or civilizational natives are trying to do is vindication of the fact that we are making a dent, we are making some impact, we are actually winning slowly and gradually. We're winning back territory. So I won't be worried about it. I would ask for more of it, because I think that is going to give us more and more traction. That is going to challenge us to do better, as opposed to a complete one-way traffic that was happening all these years. The fact that we have started to respond I'm only happy to receive more criticism, to receive more pressure, to get better at responding. We should welcome it. We should welcome this debate. We think we should welcome this contest. Because I'm confident we have far, far better story to tell. We are far better placed than our adversary going forward.
Thank you. I think we had a very enriching panel. Even Sushilji handled it solo. I think we're right on time to go on to the next panel. Another interesting panel. We have the panelists as well. I want to thank you everyone for attending this the first panel. Please stay on for the second panel as well. Kalyanji or Jaiji, do you have anything to say?
I want to, if you don't mind, Padmaji, I would like to ask Sushilji one final question before we say goodbye to him for now. Okay. So Sushilji, so the thing is, we mentioned, we talked about the challenges of writing history and how it has been ideologically driven. It's been a captive of ideologies, as you said. Now, how important is it to set that historical record straight? And what are the barriers? What are the challenges in commencing or beginning the process of correcting that history and writing history, rewriting it from our perspective? What do you think are the challenges and barriers?
Kalyanji, I think the biggest challenge lies within the reluctance of our establishment to break the stereotype and to allow opportunities and new history writing to come and prevail. Right now, of all the places, the resistance is coming from our own government. Those who have a mandate to correct it are sitting on it, dragging their feet on it. That is where our challenge is. We don't have the challenge from our adversary so much, we have the challenge from within.
Yeah, and so so let's look at that challenge from within, right? I mean, do you feel that the challenge within is structured around primarily fearing a reaction of some kind, being afraid of what might happen if this Pandora's box is opened up? Because I mean, would that be a reasonable hypothesis?
The temperament of those in power is status quoist, always and every time. It's a very rare ruler who changes things with enthusiasm. Most of the rulers are extremely reluctant because they are not sure about what the change will bring about.
Yeah.
And we've had 4 education ministers in the last 7 years, with none of them having even a nodding acquaintance with the subject of education. So you can imagine what could these education ministers may have achieved in a tenure which is 1.5 years on an average for each one of them. And with no background in this, plus primarily no set of priorities or directions set for them by the PMO, which actually runs the government and not the individual ministers. And then we expect things to change.